everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Marie if you're new here, and today's video is all about Patrick. I am still in the same outfit I was in my last video because this is like 2 seconds later. So I actually took notes about what happened to Patrick. I should have opened that before I started talking. So if you didn't watch my other video, I recorded this and the screen went dark all of a sudden, and I realized when I pressed I'm on my computer recording, and when I pressed the keypad, I saw that the little speaker icon had a line through it. I'm like, what? And so none of the audio was recorded. So I have to do this video all over again. So for 45 minutes, I had been talking and nothing was recording, just video. So yeah, hopefully I can be a little more succinct this time with this video and not be 45 minutes long. Well, the last one also did have more info about me and my son, but yeah. So it was December 11th, Patrick had the surgery, and that morning we had to be there at like 5 in the morning. So we left at like 4. So I got up at like 3 because I wanted to shower. I'm a morning shower person. If I shower at night and I get up a couple hours later, I feel gross and sweaty. So morning showers are better for me. Anyway, we got there, and then there was a lady who should have checked everybody in, but she was like, just go sit down. I'll check everybody in a little bit. And it's like, all right. So we're sitting there for almost an hour before she comes out and starts talking about how the process would go and everything. And she's like, one of the things she said was, we asked you to be here at 5 because people get stuck in traffic. They can't find the place. Parking is a nightmare sometimes. And she's like, we just want to make sure you're here on time. So we asked you to come an hour before you actually need to be here. And we're like, all right, that's why we waited for almost an hour for her to tell us that. And she's like, I'll start checking you in a minute. And then once that happens, things will move pretty quickly. And we're like, oh, okay. So she started checking people in, and Patrick was like, I'm gonna sit here for a few minutes, wait for the line to die down a little bit. I'm like, yeah, it's like being at the airport. I don't want to stand in the line for 20 minutes while I wait for people in front of me to put their stuff away and sit down. It's like, why not just wait till they're like 3 people and then be the last one on the plane? Because it doesn't matter. It's gonna take me the same amount of time regardless. So that's how he felt. Anyway, so we were sitting there, and it finally got to be really short. He went up and then came back, and I just waited for him at that point because I was like, no need for me to stand in line either when you're just telling him who you are and that you're here. And then he came back and sat with me, and less than 5 minutes later, the nurse that was going to prep him came and got him. So we were in the little room waiting for everything to happen, and he changed his gown, and then the nurse put the IV in, and then a couple doctors came in and were talking to him. Not the one that did the surgery. I actually didn't see him pre-op, but the anesthesiologist came in, and she was just chatting with us. And that's when I started getting really upset. And it's funny because normally I took care of my grandma for 12 years. I went to the ER with her so many times when it was like she might die, and I was pretty calm. And I sat through this process many times waiting for her to have a surgery, and I never got upset. But this time I started crying, and the anesthesiologist was like, she went and got a little thing of tissue, which I don't know why I didn't have any tissue with me. I always have tissue in my purse, but that day I just didn't have any. And she's like, here, she gave me, I'm like, I'm going to keep the box, because I used like 4 of them in like a 10-minute period just talking to her, and I just kept using them. I was like, wow. But she calmed me down a lot, and she was like, I was where you were about 2 weeks ago. My husband has the same thing. He had to have a kidney removed and everything. She's like, I understand that you're upset. And she's like, he's going to be fine. I'm going to take good care of him and, make sure that he's okay. And I was like, all right. And then about 10 minutes after that, they were like, all right, it's time. And they wheeled him into the room, which I had to say goodbye. There's a hallway where it's like you go back to the waiting area, or you go to the actual operating room. So I gave him a kiss goodbye, and I went and waited. And then it was really early still, so I just found a nice chair. There was a window that had a little ledge, and I would put my phone there and just leaned against it, and I just took a nap for a while. And Then I got a text saying that they started the procedure, and then I got a call about 90 minutes later, and I think it was a nurse. It might have been the anesthesiologist. It was a woman. I don't remember who she said she was, but I could hear his heart beeping in the background, the monitor, and I was like, okay, he's okay. I can hear that. As long as it's like a nice steady beep, he's good. And she's like, everything's going well. We'll let you know what's going on in another 90 minutes. And I was like, okay. And at that point, I went downstairs and got something to eat for breakfast. And then I went back upstairs, and it was maybe less than an hour later. The doctor actually called and said that the surgery was over. And I was like, okay, great. The one thing that he said that was kind of weird, though, was that when they were removing the tumor, it was encroaching on his spleen, and that the spleen cracked. And I was like, I didn't say anything to the doctor, but I thought, in all of the years of watching Grey's Anatomy, that has never happened. What do you mean the spleen cracked? I've never heard of that. So I was like, okay. And he didn't seem concerned. I was like, all right. So I didn't ask questions, but I was like, that's kind of weird. It did become a problem later. But at the time, it was like, all right, he's fine. He's out. He's alive. And then the nurse in the recovery area called, and she's like, once we get him in a room upstairs, we'll let you know, and then you can go join him. I'm like, okay. So I was sitting around for a little while, napping again, because a couple hours of waiting. And at some point I was like, all right, what time is it? And I went and got lunch, and then I waited for maybe another half an hour, and I was like, okay, it was almost 2 at that point. And I was like, I need to leave by 3 to go get our son from daycare, because we're in downtown Atlanta for the surgery, and we live north of Atlanta, and with traffic and everything, I was like, it's going to take about an hour, but I don't want to pick him up too late. I also don't want to get stuck in like horrible traffic either going home, and ended up being, I didn't want to be late or anything picking him up. So I talked to the nurse that registered him or checked him in, and she's like, okay, let me call. And so she talked to the nurse that I had spoken to earlier, and she was like, yeah, you can come back, if you're going to leave and you're not going to be here very long. She's like, you can come back. Normally we don't allow visitors, but I was there for like 10 minutes. So she's like, that's fine. So I gave him the stuff that he had, like a little backpack with some things in it, like his phone and his iPad and his slides, and then a change of clothes for when he went to leave the hospital. And I gave that to him, and basically her, because he was just laying there and he was kind of out of it. He was awake, but he was just really groggy. And I talked to him for a minute. I'm like, you're still here. You're doing good and everything. And then I went to pick up our son. So then before we get to the next day, later that day, it was probably like 6 o'clock, 7, he finally got a room. And they put him on a floor with everybody that was on that floor has the same thing going on. Either they had a kidney removed, or they have issues with their kidney. So it's like each floor has their own different body part that they're monitoring. And the next day I went to see him, and then let me look at my notes here. So day 1, they took him off the IV drip, like day 1 in the recovery room. They took him off the IV drip because they wanted his intestines to wake up, and he had a lot of gas, but he wasn't having bowel movements. So they're like, we can't give you too many pain meds, but he did get up and walk around, and that did help with the gas and getting his intestines to wake up. And he was able to get up and walk around, but he was still kind of coming off of the pain meds that they'd given him the day before. So he was in pain, but it wasn't too bad. It was like a manageable amount. And then day 2, he finally went number 1 and 2, and he got a lot more color back in his skin. And then day 3, they gave him solid foods, but his output, there's a drain on your belly, that started turning pink. And they got really, like, it wasn't this color pink, but it was pink. And they were like, oh, that's not normal. So they took him off of solid food. Let me go to day 4. And day 4, he was on liquids. And they also found out that he had a partially collapsed lung. So they gave him this little machine where I can't remember if he had to breathe in or breathe out in it. I think it was a breathing in machine. and you have to get it to a certain level and hold it at that level for so many seconds. And then day 5, they were observing him. I brought our son to visit because at that point he hadn't seen him in 5 days or 6 days, and because he didn't see him the morning of the surgery. And we had a friend whose daughter has babysat him before. She spent the night, so that way we didn't have to worry about him in the morning, because we had to leave at 4 in the morning, and we didn't want to wake him up and put him somewhere else for him to go back to sleep and just, try and deal with that mess. So the babysitter was able to just give him breakfast in the morning and take him to daycare, and he was fine. He was just like, he saw her the night before. He's like, oh, you're cool, you're here. And they played. So he wasn't like, where's mom and dad, or sad or anything. He's just like, oh, somebody's playing with me. He's a funny little kid. So day 5, yeah, so he got to see him. He was walking very slowly, but he did have a fever, so they were worried about him having an infection. And the day 6, they ended up adding 2 more drains because his output was getting to be almost this color. And the drains that they put one on his hip on the left side, and then one in his back. It was still on the left side, but it was towards the middle of his back. And those were outputting it was darker than this. It was like almost a brown color. And that was like, ooh, that's a gross color. And there was, just because of the spleen building up and the crack, it was like trying to heal and everything. So they also just had him on the liquid diet too. He lost 25 pounds. He went from weighing about 215 to he weighs like 194 now. So yeah, he's lost, you can see it in his face that he's lost weight, and in his body. He's got broad shoulders, and men kind of are shaped triangular, but where the ribs are and stuff, it doesn't come in that much on him. It's almost parallel, but now it's at a more of a defined angle, and you can see his hips. He's almost got a feminine shape because he's lost so much weight around his waist, and that's whoa. It's just here, eat more, but he can't have any fat, so he's not, and then he can't really lift weights or anything, so he's not really building muscle. He's losing fat and muscle, and it's just really, really showing on him. It's the doctor's not too concerned, but I'm like, wow, because he looks so much different. He was never a fat guy. He's just very tall. So being over 200 pounds at 6'4" is not a big deal. But when you lose and you go under 200 pounds at 6'4", it's you can see ribs, and then also now that he's missing an organ, there's a bump in his stomach. It kind of curves in one spot, and then just the curve in his waist and then coming back out where his hips are. It's wow, that's really, really noticeable compared to what he used to look like. So it's kind of once he's able to exercise again, I'm you're going to come to the gym with me, and I know I need to lose weight, but I'm you need to gain some. And, I don't want him to overdo it or hurt himself, but I think that, a little weight training is going to be good for him. And he's making a lot of noise right now. Okay. So day 6, they added that. And then, day 7, his pain level was, hard to control, and he was having a hard time sleeping and relaxing. So they also started him on soft food, like mashed potatoes. And then day 8, Nicola was able to visit him, and he had a CT done, and there was less fluid. So they were happy about that. And then let me look at the calendar, because I just wrote day 9, but I didn't take notes after that. Okay, so day 10 was the day that they let him go home. That was the 20th. And sorry, the camera's shaking because I'm touching the table. So on the 20th, they're like, we're going to let you go home. And they were like, we know your birthday is tomorrow, so we want to get you home for your birthday. And I was like, yeah, that would be nice. And I was just like, okay, I don't know how to make fat-free cake because he couldn't have fat at all. With the drains in, they're like, you can't eat anything with. Okay, sorry for that interruption, but my phone rang and I forgot that I didn't mute it. All right, where were we? Okay, so he came home for his birthday and then he was okay that day. He had gotten out of bed, he walked around, he was playing a little bit with Nicola, and that night he came down and I made him like some white rice with chicken with some, like the nutritionist was like, you can put any seasoning you want, you just can't use fat to cook. So it was like, all right, I put the chicken breast in the air fryer with a bunch of seasoning on it. And then I also found, I think it's called Skinny Girl. It's a salad dressing and it's fat free. And there's like a poppy seed one, there's some kind of vinaigrette, and I think there was like a third flavor. And Patrick and I both really like the poppy seed one. So we put that on there and it gave it some flavor. So it wasn't just like, here's some crappy boiled chicken with no flavor and some rice. It's like, it had some flavor at least. So we ate dinner and then he's like, okay, I'm feeling tired, I'm going to go to bed. And it's like, all right. And then the next day he barely got out of bed. And he's like, I'm in a lot of pain. And I was like, well, what do you want me to do? And when he's sick or he's in pain, he just wants to be left alone. And I'm like, all right, I'll just leave you alone. But by Monday, I put Nicola in daycare and I came home and I'm like, you don't look okay. You're in a lot of pain. You can barely move. I'm like, I don't think you should stay home. Like, you really should go back to the ER. And he's like, hey, I don't really want to do that. I'm like, but you can't move. Like, that's not normal. Something else could be going on. Like, you don't know what's going on inside. Something could be wrong. So he messaged the doctor and the doctor was like, you should go to the ER. So we had to go to downtown again, and we get there and they have this like valet service. It's kind of weird. Like, there's nowhere to really drive up and drop somebody off to walk into the ER. Cause I just wanted to like drop them off, let them walk in, and then I would go park. And they just don't have that ability the way they have it set up. So we were waiting in the valet line for like the longest time. And it just seems like it's not a very good system. They really need like two lines and like drop off and pick up, like something like that, instead of just being kind of one line where you're just sitting there waiting forever. Because there was somebody who was asking a ton of questions and like holding up everybody else, and they ended up leaving. And it's like, really? I think we were in line for about 15 minutes before we finally got up to the front, and then we had to wait for somebody to bring it a wheelchair out for him because he couldn't walk. He was in so much pain. And then we finally got in the side, and there was another line to like check in, and then we had to wait for them to say, okay, come back. And I mean, that part wasn't so bad because it's like, okay, well, at least we're here. I don't even remember what time it was. I just remember that it felt like we were there forever. I think it was around 5 o'clock when I left, because I was like worrying about picking Nicola up on time. So when I left him, he was in a bed in the ER, and I knew that at some point they would put him back on the floor that he had been in before. I don't remember what time he called and said that he was finally there. I think he was in the ER for a day. I don't remember going the next day to visit him because I think he was still in the ER, and it wasn't until later that night that they moved him upstairs. But he was just downstairs in the ER for a really, really long time. And then they moved him to a floor where I was able to go visit, and he was there for a couple more days. So it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I think they let him off Thursday or Friday. So he was there for Christmas. And for Christmas, what I ended up doing with our son, I didn't have time to wrap presents or anything. And I just put all of his presents under the tree. There was a couple things that were in bags at least. And I mean, he's 3, he doesn't care. He's just like, oh, new toys. So it was just all around the tree. And then I took a little video of him opening some things and I sent it to Patrick. And then after he opened everything, we ended up, I threw him in the bathtub. I was like, I'm gonna take a shower. And our bathtub and shower are right next to each other. So I can see he's old enough that he's not gonna drown, but if he did something, I could see and make sure that he's okay. And so we got ready and we went and visited Patrick, and I had a bag with a couple little gifts in it for him. And I'm like, we're going to bring this to Daddy. And so Nicola was all excited, and they really don't like kids to be there, but I was like, he hasn't seen his dad. It's Christmas. And they're like, all right. So we had gotten to visit him a couple other times when he was there, and they saw that he was a pretty quiet kid, and I control him. Like when we're in public, I make sure that he's not running around screaming and stuff. And if he starts acting uncontrollably, I just pick him up and I remove him from wherever we're at so he stops making a scene. And if he acted that way at the hospital, we would have just left, and my husband would have been like, okay, I'll see you later, and I would have called him in the car and we could have continued talking about whatever it is that we needed to talk about, but he would have understood why I was just removing him from the situation. So thankfully that didn't happen, but he had made him a little card to, like, I had him sit down, and we had like glue and little fuzzy balls and jewels and stuff, and I wrote "I love Daddy," and then he glued things onto it, and so he had that in the hospital room, and everybody was like, "Oh, that's so cute," and they're like, "Did your son make that?" And it was just it was nice for Patrick to have something at least in the room, and so yeah, he ended up spending Christmas there, and then the gifts that he opened, we just took them with us because I was like, you're gonna have to come home with them anyway. But I wanted him to have something since he couldn't have the tree and all that stuff, and we didn't do Christmas dinner or anything. It would have been just for myself because my son eats like cup of noodle and mac and cheese. So what is he gonna eat? So it was just like a very, very quiet Christmas compared to normal. And then New Year's, we didn't do anything special because, again, my husband can't eat fat, and until he gets the drains removed, he has to be on a fat-free diet. So let me skip forward to, what day was it? I want to say it was last Tuesday. He had the drain in his back removed because that just stopped putting anything out, and the little that was coming out for like a day was just, there was almost nothing. And then the next day there was just nothing again, like absolutely nothing. There was, like, the day before it was like 1 milliliter, and then less than that. And then the next day there was just nothing. So the doctor's like, okay, we're going to remove that one. Patrick is drama queen. So there's something called I think it's vessel vagus nerve or something. It's some kind of rhymy vagus nerve thing. And when they removed, it's called a pigtail. So the drain itself is like this long tube, and then it has a little connector port where you can clean it. And then there's a thicker tube that goes into the bag. Well, when they removed it, I saw why they called it a pigtail, because it has this kind of little curve to it, a little like a pigtail, to kind of keep it into the body. And the doctor and the nurse were behind Patrick. He was sitting on the exam chair, so it has like a high back, and he had his body next to the back part of it. And so he's holding on, and then the doctors are behind him removing it. And I'm in front of him because I didn't want to see. I'm not, as much experience I have with medical stuff, I'm not good with blood and gross openings and things like that. And I can barely handle my own blood without passing out. So I'm not I'm calm in situations where it's like emergent situations, but with blood and everything, I'm not the best person to have in the room. But so I was like standing in front of him, and they're talking and stuff, and they pulled it out, and he's like, "Oh, I don't feel good." And he's like, "I see stars." And so I just stood right in front of him because I had been sitting down, and he started doing this with his eyes, and I was like, "Oh, that's not good." And he's holding onto the chair, and he's kind of like shaking, and then he got really clammy. You could see like sweat beads, and I was like, oh, he's not okay. And he started kind of twitching, and I was like, I think he's going to faint. And then he did. And his eyes were open, which was really weird, but he just was there, and he just went like that. And I was in front of him, so he didn't fall, but I was like, oh my God. And I was just kind of petting his head and giving me kisses. I'm like, are you okay? And he was just out. It wasn't very long, but he was just out. And then the doctor that was there was an intern. So I don't think she's seen that before. And she did mention the vagus nerve thing, but she got the nurse to go out and get another doctor who came in, who was like older than all of us. And he's like, oh yeah, he's fine. There's just this nerve thing that happens. It's just that people pass out. And we're like, okay. So they had another nurse come in with some juice and and like a cold cloth, and they put it on his head, and he like woke up and he was just like, how long was that out? It was less than 30 seconds. It was maybe like 10 seconds, but he had no idea. He just was like, what happened? And I'm like, well, you fainted. And so I was like, this isn't your first time fainting. But this was very different than the last time he fainted. And I think I told that story I might not have told that story because it was after I had my son. It was, it happened while I was in the ER in labor. Okay, I'll tell it because I don't remember if I told it or not. So I was induced and we went in the morning, and I was on like a drip to get the medicines for the induction and things going. And then it was just like, I was having contractions. I didn't realize I was having contractions because I wasn't feeling them. And then all of a sudden they started, and I was like, oh my God, this is really painful. And the doctor's like, well, what are you waiting for? And epidural wise. And I was like, well, I was kind of waiting till it was closer to when I was actually going to be pushing instead of, I wanted to do the Lamaze stuff. And she's like, it's not going to get any better than it is right now. And my contractions were coming less than a minute apart. So I wasn't getting any relief between them. And she's like, we might be able to slow that down, but we probably won't be able to slow it down. I was like, oh my God. So just with induction stuff, it's different than going into natural labor. So doing the Lamaze thing wasn't really an option for me at that point. And I was like, all right, I was going to get the epidural anyway. So I'm like, just give it to me. So this was like almost 12 hours after we when it was around 7 p.m. So I'm sitting there, the anesthesiologist is behind me. I can't say that word, anesthesiologist. Blah. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. That doctor is behind me trying to put it into my back, and I have scoliosis, and there's the last couple vertebrae. There's no space anymore. There's no cartilage. It's just like the bone is almost rubbing on each other. So he's trying to get it in there so it's not painful, but it hurts a lot going in. And in front of me on this side is my husband, and on this side is the nurse. And I had I had an IV in this hand. And so I couldn't really squeeze. I could just kind of do this. And then the nurse had my hand for some reason instead of Patrick holding my other hand. And I'm kind of squeezing his hand, and he starts doing the Lamaze breathing. This is during COVID. He's got a mask on, and he didn't eat all day. So he started hyperventilating because he didn't have enough oxygen and he was hungry. And all of a sudden I see him kind of going like that. And I was just like, oh, he's going to pass out. And the nurse is looking at my feet. And I'm just like, hello, I'm talking to you. And she's just completely oblivious. She's about 5 feet tall. Patrick is 6'4". He's this tree standing next to her that just starts falling. And she's staring at my feet. I didn't like this nurse. I had issues with her already. But this is where I've never punched anybody before, but I really wanted to punch her because I'm like, hello, something's going on next to you. How are you a nurse and you just completely ignore your surroundings? So he's pulling me back. He's pulling me forward because he's falling backwards. I'm trying to hold on to him so he doesn't fall. She's ignoring him. And the doctor's behind me going, stop moving. I'm like, he's pulling me. I'm like, he's fainting. And he pulled me really hard forward. And that's when the doctor was like, oh my God. Well, then I was able to let go at some point because he had been squeezing my fingers really hard for a second. And then the nurse kind of was like, looked up and over, and she was like, oh, he's on the floor. I was like, jeez. So I heard him hit his head. It was loud. And I was like, oh my God, it didn't crack, but it just, hearing a head hit the floor, and he's bald. So it's like skin hitting ooh. Yeah. So then he starts twitching, and I've never seen anybody faint. It's not like it is on TV. At all. And he's twitching, and I was like, oh my God, he's having a seizure. And I just thought something really was going on. And the anesthesiologist comes around the side of the bed, and he's like, no, he's fine. This is what happens when people faint. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Okay. And so I calmed down after that. I was like, all right, he's fine. And then the nurse comes in with other nurses, and they give him some crackers and some juice. And I was like, I told you should have ate earlier. And he sat down, and they put a cold compress on his head and everything. And then the doctor comes back around and is like, let me put this thing. Oh my God. So this is the second time that Patrick has fainted. I hope it's the last, but he's very dramatic on occasion. And so I tease him and call him Drama Queen because he's like such a calm person most of the time. So let me see. Yeah, so they removed the one drain and he still has the one in his hip. They removed the other one from the front the day that he left the hospital. I mentioned that in the other video. I can't remember if I mentioned that in this one, but that was, yeah, so he still has the one in. And then we went yesterday to see the surgeon for a follow-up and he removed the staples and he almost fainted again. But this time he's sitting in just a regular chair and he was able to lean against the wall. And they did bring him water and a cold compress, but he didn't faint. He just got really like clammy and it was just like, ooh, and he saw some stars and stuff, but he's like, it didn't get as bad as last time. But the first doctor had told him to do this because if you tighten up and you grip and you make like a fist, it kind of confuses the nerve and it's like, oh, you're doing something over here instead of whatever happened to the rest of you that's making you almost faint. So he kind of did that this time and I think that helped him a lot. And then he just laid back. So he was okay for a few minutes and then he's like, all right, I'm ready to go. And the doctor was just like, I want to see you again in a month and let's see how things are going. And I'm hoping next week he can get that one drain removed on his side. It did change colors. It's a lighter pink now. It's not a darker, almost brown color like it had been. And the consistency too, when the first week, every time we were draining it, it was really gooey, like honey. And then it's a lot more liquidy, watery consistency now. And then it went from being like a brownish red to it's a lot lighter than this. It's getting kind of a light pink color. And he thinks something is wrong because it's like milky. And I was like, well, the doctor mentioned that it needs to look like lemonade when it comes out. And he's like, yeah, but it has to be like watery lemonade, not milky. And I'm like, well, he thinks he hurt his spleen again. And I'm like, I think it's just, things are healing and it's just changing. I'm like, don't freak out. But I'm like, tell the doctor then, if she thinks it's weird, she'll let you know and you'll go in and have it checked out or whatever. But she's like, no, that's normal. You have to keep it in because it's still outputting quite a bit, like 40 milliliters at least a day. So it's kind of a slow process to heal, but he also thought he was going to be better because they mentioned you'll be walking the next day. So he thought he was going to feel fine the next day. It's like, no, you hacked it open. They ripped out an organ. You're not going to be fine. It's going to take you a while. So he's been a little impatient with the healing part, but he's doing good. He's on track with other things besides the drain. He's on track where he's supposed to be. And I think it's going to be a couple more months before he really feels good, but he had the staples removed and I'll put on screen where like a diagram of where they actually put the stitches and everything, or the staples, because it was a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. And I thought it was going to be like maybe that big on his side. This was like above the middle of the chest down and around the belly button and down. It was like, wow, that's a lot. But he's healing and everything. And tomorrow we have an appointment with the doctor who's in charge of everything, the one that's like kind of coordinating his surgeries and the healing and stuff. And we're going to talk to him about joining the trial or not, because we have questions about that. And I kind of need answers before I'm like, okay, this is a good idea. Cause it sounds like a good idea, but there's a couple issues with the side effects where I'm like, it causes like hepatitis and like you can get hepatitis. Okay, well, which one? And you guys cure it if you get it, because like hepatitis C, I think is the one that there's a cure for, but it's like outrageously expensive in the US. And I remember reading an article saying you could literally fly to India, buy the medicine over the counter, take it, get cured, and come back at cheaper than it costs in the US to get it. So I'm like, do we have to do that? Are we going to India? Like, we have passports, but I'm just kind of like, there's a few other side effects where I want to know. I don't know if you just heard my stomach again. I just want to know what's going to happen with those before he signs up for them. And yeah, so things are getting better. It's still been a lot of appointments and kind of craziness, and but it's starting to slow down and go back into regular life. And I have other things that are going on that I haven't talked about because the video is like 3 hours long. So my next video, I will update you on all the other weird stuff that's happened, because I'm a weird magnet. There's just other things going on. But yeah, I'm gonna end the video now because it's just so much stuff. And but Patrick's doing a lot better, and he should be good soon. And we'll see what goes on with the immunotherapy, and I'll let you guys know probably next week a little more about that stuff. So have a good day. Bye.